Hello, it's Darkwolf, and today I'm going to be talking about thugs and supercombatants in context. Now, what does that mean in practice? What does this video actually talk about? It's talking about the situation surrounding using these awesome and fun tools. Now, the reason I think this is valuable is I've found that a lot of the discussion that, of course, takes place between players is very vacuum-based. It's without considering a lot of the context of the matchups, the situation, how you got there, the blesses, builds, and so on. And I believe that when looking at anything realistically from your own game's perspectives rather than theory crafting, it's very important to keep the context in mind when either helping others or just trying to think for yourself. Now, in this case, of course, like any video on this, I feel like it's valuable to go over the definitions I'm going to be using. Thugs are anything meant to take 15 to 6 PD consistently, or small forces of up to 20-30 troops without mage support. Without mage support's the key point. And you stick a single mage in 15 PD, and often these will lose if it's a well-designed thug. You know, it's your Frost brand, your Vine brand in cases, very light gear set. Your heavy thug is anything from 15 to 40, 45 PD in that ballpark, and capable of taking on small stacks with mage support. You know, kill a water elemental, kill some prop buff dudes, not die to a single frozen heart, stuff like that. Now, of course, you'll never be able to defeat any single mage. You can't say it ultimately, but this is where context is in. Most heavy thugs have something that makes them not vulnerable to the low mage commitment forces that the enemy brings, right? You're fighting an air nation, you got shock res, so on, so on. And this includes from Bless, by the way. The last one is Supercombatants. Now, Supercombatants is a bit of an iffy space because they can mean a couple of things. And the generic definition is anything that can take infinite PD without afflictions, without losses, or defeat large armies when specifically geared to fight them, or medium-large armies with mage support when generically geared. Now, I'm talking kill 5-6 mages with a bunch of troops, but like you're fighting a big army, a big stack that's well scripted, you're going to have to be geared out and equipped specifically for the foe. Now, this doesn't include specific niche cases, like, or I don't want to say niche, specific cases like counter thugs, army thugs, and so on and so forth. Let's just talk about the generic, you know, it's your thug, whatever, example. Now, in this case, I'm going to give a couple examples to kind of show what I mean here. So this is a fight between a Theranos and a... Now, ignore the senseis. They're just here to make this easier to script because, to be ultimate, I'm kind of lazy. But in this case, it's just a bunch of raiding Melia, right? And this is a generic Melia raid stack, right? 3 Melia, they're blessing, they've got a good Melia raiding blast. They're going to buff themselves up, and they're a foe. These are, without context, technically a heavy thug, because these can take up to 40 PD quite consistently, right? Get a point buffer, they could do infinite. But in this case, you see a bunch of light thugs, right? A bunch of tools that Pangea has quite easily, handles it. Now, without context, you look at this and you're like, oh, well, the Pangea Force takes 5 more gems. Gold-wise, it's about even, but still, Pangea spent equal value. But one thing that's very important to remember in context with thugs, and in this case, is when defending against thugs, right, it's always harder to catch them. However, the chassis that is the Hierophant that Pangea has means this is actually much higher value for Pangea than it looks like, because they have higher map move, they're stealthy. So if they have roving parties like this that are consistently able to beat Melia stacks, you can diffuse the threat of Melia in their entirety. However, this isn't a big loss for Theranos. Keep that in mind. It's a big win for Pangea, but not a big loss for Theranos. Because while Pangea is capable of easily handling these, Theranos, this is like 9 gems with hammers, right? Now, on the other end, we have this, right? Now, this engagement is much more expensive for Theranos, right? This is a, we'll say like 25 geared Dione, my voice. And over here, you've got a fully geared, specially built Telkine, you've got a buffer, you've got a Swarmcaster. And in this case, this is a fight that ultimately favors the Yomi from gem expenditure. But of course, the Dione, being a Dione, easily dies to a Holy Scourge. And this is where a lot of people be like, okay, well, the Telkine is a lot more expensive and so on, but you have to think about the context of the situation. And I didn't fully get into it, but the Yomi in this case took a Yomi Bless, right? Or I should say a generic Dione Bless. And this is part of the reason I'm ultimately not a fan of them. But you see, they spent their Bless points on this. So immediately, contextually, the value of this, while not its direct value, the value of handling it has gone up because this is what their build does, right? Additionally, when you kill something like this, this can leave, right? It's just walking away. Now, of course, this is an arena map. The context isn't all there, but this can walk away, in which case it can find its next target and magic phase on top of it. Yomi can have an infinite amount of thugs, right? All of these geared out that are quite cheap, but considering the commander status and the availability of it, it's a lot more valuable to them than something like those 3 Melia would be for Therados, even if it's the same gem cost, because your build is based around these, right? Those 3 Melia are just a part of the Therados strategy. Your build's based around these, your gem expenditures. Even if it's not directly gem, it's your commander points, and so on. Additionally, in the context of playing Yomi, if you're going for a thug build, and let's say you're also using Oni Shugo, the tool that the Therados used to handle works consistently in the vast majority of cases. Now, I'm not going to say every time, but it is a very consistent, very effective use against any of these, against Oni Shugo, against Ione, against if you had a Demon God, right? Meanwhile, the tool that Pangaea used against Therados, while effective against Melia, will not be effective against all builds, all scripts, all strategies, because while it's an effective tool, Therados also has a lot of effective tools to deal with it. You'll have Frozen Heart, you'll have Swarm, you'll have the Melia being geared with like Vine Shields to negate the defense, you'll have a Telkeen drop, right? In which case, the value of that engagement, while on a micro scale, is very high and is great for Pangaea because it lets it know consistently it could clear those threats, does not define the war in the way that this engagement does, even though this engagement is a lot more expensive for the Therados side, right? And I just want to give this to you an example as a way to look at your engagements and your threat prioritization in the future. You look at, there's a lot of nations in this game that have Supercombatants, heavy thug chassis, and other important chassis that they either build their strategy around or are merely a part of the network. You know, let's use another example. You look at Ashdod or Hinnom, they've got their Melkarts, their Adons, but those are often not the primary facet of their strategy, in which case overspending like this just to handle that if they only have one is nowhere near as valuable than in this case where you do the same thing against one. Even if the opponent only had one Dione out and no Oni Shugos, this is still much more valuable because the variability of threats it can handle from the nation's much higher. And when you kill something like this, right, most of this gear can be reused, right? The Holy Scourge goes away next time you're fighting Yomi. The rest of it gets put on other stuff and you have other use cases. I don't want to make this a run-on video. I'm trying to keep it short, so that's the main topic of it. But tell me what you think, if there's any specific examples you think I should have included.